you very much. So, hi everyone, and I'm super excited to host the very first Ethical Procurement Edge podcast. And it's with me, Victoria Folbig. So, what is it about? This podcast aims to inspire and support procurement professional to execute often stressful projects and deals guided by ethical, values-driven, creative, and responsible sourcing principles. So in each episode, we will explore with our guests how procurement can drive positive change and create lasting value. And we hope that wherever you are in the professional journey, this podcast will equip you with the knowledge, confidence, and tools to transform your work into a force of good to give yourselves that ethical procurement edge. So without further ado, my first guest is none other than Alex Jennings, the co-founder of the Alchemie network, and obviously the network that is hosting this podcast. So, Alex, the growth of this network has been phenomenal. It has been, and I'm sure you'll correct me from the stats, but the stats that I have, you're live 6 months, 2.6 thousand users across over 170 countries. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's 2,640 now, but yes, 170 countries is correct.
So in 6 months?
6 months. We launched middle of April.
So this is amazing. And what's not noteworthy for me is that the way you decided to set up and organize the Alchemie network. So it is a non-for-profit, right? It's an NGO with a vision to give funds to charities, startups, and universities. So could you share why you decided to set up the Alchemie network the way you've done?
Okay. So a couple of things. There are two parts to the Alchemie network. So there is the Alchemie network itself, which covers the costs and is where we are driving the community. And I'll explain why we decided to start it in the first place. And the second part is 30% of our revenue goes to the Alchemie Foundation. And the Alchemie Foundation is where we want to do good. So we call it Procurement for Good. And in that space, when revenue starts, we want to connect our ambassadors with charities, with startups, with NGOs, with speaking engagements in universities. We want to encourage the growth of the profession. We want to make mentoring and reverse mentoring a natural thing within the network. We want to connect people with job opportunities. And if we have money left over, we would also like to look at bursaries where we can help support the education of individuals into this profession, not another profession. The reason we set up the community was really born out of frustration. Frustration with LinkedIn, because it's not what it was 18 years ago when I joined. Frustration with other communities that have allowed themselves to wither and die. And I'm not going to name them. Frustration with some of the educational bodies that exist in the UK and in North America, in the fact that they focus on the profession first and people second, in my opinion. And I think you build a community by connecting with the people, and the professional stuff follows. So we are trying to create connections with individuals around the world. The original idea behind it came from a late night with myself and Harold. Following my retirement, I'd been retired nearly 6 years. Sorry, 6 months. 6 years feels like 6 years. 6 months, and I realized that I'd spent a long time, very successful career, made a lot of money for corporations, but couldn't look back really and say you'd made a difference. And I felt like I needed to do that. I felt like I wanted to assist in our journey on both ethical procurement and our journey towards a sustainable net zero future. Now, we are not in competition with any other team of people or organization that is out there. We are all after the same goal. So we see ourselves differently with regards to we want to partner with those people and see how we can support each other and co-promote rather than some organizations that that see you as competition. Sustainability isn't a competition. We have a problem that we're trying to solve. Ethical procurement is not a competition. It is something that we should all find abhorrent, and we should all be drawing red lines and not crossing them. And the problem, as I see it, is the red lines are written in chalk, and the C-suite quite often comes out with a hose pipe and gets rid of them or moves them, or makes you forget them for a period because there are challenging objectives. So there are many reasons. One of the biggest things for me was personal one with my mother. So I have two sisters, and they both live lives of giving. My one sister and husband are joint pastors in a church, and my other sister and husband are very heavily connected with a charity called Open Doors. And I'd like to also be able to say, you know, you did something good as well. So this is a passion for me, and it's also to be able to look at my mother and say, yeah, I like what you're doing.
It's incredible you say that, because you've said that you've had such a long career, and yet you believe that you haven't really made much of a dent in the ethical side of it, which it'd be interesting to examine, because one of the questions I had to you is, throughout your career, and it's been a long career, I looked at your LinkedIn profile, very interesting career. I'm sure you came to certain crossroads, negotiations, deals, projects, whatever it was, like all of us in procurement, where you had options, an easy option or a difficult ethical option. And something tells me that you probably had them pretty early in your career or throughout your career, and you didn't take the easy option out. And I think what also, in the spirit of inspiring people and also getting them to share their experiences, hopefully on this podcast sometime later, share with us some of these, or one of these that comes to mind, where it would have been easy to just sign that deal and walk away, whereas you kind of stopped there and said, no, I'm not for easy, I'm for what's right.
Yeah. So just to clarify that point with regards to, have I made a difference? I think the way I've run the teams has made a difference to hopefully them and their careers. Some of the decisions and directions we've made and the education of our suppliers has made a difference. But this is a small part of our ecosystem. And yes, we all have to start somewhere. But you know what the Alchemie network wants to do is to share those experiences from all of us across every organization, so as we know what to do and how to do it. We also want to educate people in how to argue with their company. So when they are faced with that position, they are armed with the tools that enable them to say, no, this is the direction we're going in, and this is why, and this is what you state in your corporate objectives and strategy, and what you're asking me to do goes against all of that. So I think there have been many circumstances where I have been faced with the challenge of in-year results and doing the right thing. And the problem there is that organizations tend to monetize the results. So you're rewarded for hitting a certain target, and you're not rewarded financially from a bonus perspective with doing the right thing. they are the how is rarely rewarded. There are some organizations now that are building a proportion into their targets that are connected with sustainability, and sometimes social governance. But normally it's how are we doing against our net zero target? That's the only one at the moment. But when you're faced with no one in the company is going to get their bonus if you don't do this, it's a tough one. And I have to say, whilst I have fought some of those battles, there have been circumstances in the past where I have been forced to source from an organization that I probably felt less comfortable doing so. You don't win all of them. If you constantly made a stand and you walked from the job, then you either need deep pockets or you need to live on your own. When you have, children, mortgage responsibilities, that's a harder thing to do. So sometimes the way I used to look at it was, you're not going to win every battle. And they are all steps in a journey towards where we want to get to from an ethical perspective and from a sustainability perspective. And if sometimes you lose one of those battles, then it's okay, because you can go back and recall those discussions that you had and demonstrate, look, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep ignoring, or we can't stop looking deep enough. I probably had more examples when I spent a short period in sales, 6 years, but I inherited a few things that I didn't like and they were inappropriate. And I had to stop those from happening. And sometimes personally, that from a risk perspective, that's quite a difficult thing to do as well. But if you want to run a white company, if you want to ensure that anti-corruption and bribery are not happening within your organization, then you've got to stand by that. So I've had many examples where I've had a win, where we have said, no, look, we're going to move from this supply to this supply because they're not demonstrating what we want to see in our supply base. But there have been circumstances where I've been told, we need this deal, we need this money, and we've been forced to do that. But I think you have to be educating your suppliers and your people internally, and you do that through regular connections and setting them targets and having discussions about what's going on in their supply chain.
And I think this, what you're saying about educating resonates for me, certainly in my experience as a CPO, but also you're saying don't win every battle, or don't set yourself up to win every battle. I agree, because it's also your reputation as, sometimes if you're trying to do everything by the book, it's mentally exhausting, but also people don't take you seriously. So you need to kind of always, and that's the fun, I suppose, of the profession. You have to always like walk that line. But for me, from weaving education and wins, I used to say to my C-suite, look, this is the cheapest supplier, and there are some issues with that supplier, and this is what I found. And this is a supplier that is more expensive, but they are more expensive because they invest in their people, because their quality is higher. Hey, you tell me which one you're going to go for, and kind of throw that out to the budget holders, and then see them having that education moment, but also that decision moment. Because I find that actually elevating the problem and sharing the facts and then stepping away and seeing it sink actually is a very good kind of negotiation tactic to go to people, okay, you make the decision with me. I'm giving you the facts. I understand the market. I understand the suppliers that have given you all that work. And now it's for you to decide. But I don't know what happens in that stratosphere that you're in. So I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. And that actually worked in a lot of times to the favor of the right answer. But sometimes, as you said, sometimes it didn't. But at least for me, I looked at myself, at the work my team was doing, and saying, I did the best I could. And that was good for me because I wasn't there just rolling over and saying, okay, fine, let's sign that purchase order. You're talking about your experience in sales, and I wanted to touch on that as well because I had a little stint in sales. Mine was about 2 years, but I loved it. And I loved it because it forced me as a procurement professional to take stock at how we treat sales and our suppliers. Because when you come from a big organization, I find, is that sometimes you kind of default to a natural negotiation style. And I think with some of the people that are here participating, I had this discussion about negotiation style defaults. We tend to default a certain way. And when you're forced into sales of something that's highly commoditized, and I'd love to hear your experience about it, when you then go into procurement back, what I found is I was much more respectful of the individuals. I understood their sales play for sure, but I also understood that actually there were two ways of addressing a problem. Either, you either say you have to do it because I'm your big client, or you try to do things with a view on partnership and creativity that actually gave the salespeople more ability to support you as a company and respect you as an individual. And that gave actually better results rather than just saying, I want your, bottom price. So tell me how that shaped your sales experience, shaped your negotiation style when you came back to procurement.
So I'll also explain to you why I went to sales. So I think from a selling perspective to our suppliers, I was already in a good place. I spent 21 years in procurement. I knew how to sell to our suppliers to get more of their time than others. A big part of buying is selling. You're selling your company. You're selling. Why do you want them to treat you like their number one customer? And you build a relationship that enables you to formulate that. My problem was more around selling principles internally, selling principles across the globe, and managing internal stakeholders. Because somewhat naively, and I think it was probably generated from my time at Toyota, at Toyota, everybody, 100%, are all trying to do things for the good of the company. There are no exceptions. So when you come up with an idea, you don't have roadblocks. If it's a good idea, then everybody supports it. And then I went into the real world where it wasn't like that. And I somewhat naively took the fact that if you came up with a good idea, everyone would support it. And I said to our CEO, there's a group CPO position. I feel ready for it. And he said, you're not ready. And I said, no, but I am ready. If you don't give me the role, I'm going to leave. And he said, well, look, I don't think you're ready, and I want to support your growth. I'd like you to consider moving to sales for a period to widen your capability and your experience. So I decided to he also made it worth my while financially as well, and became a bit of a no-brainer personally. And I moved to sales. And the first 3 years was as commercial director, putting some structure and some strategy behind how we went to market. A lot of the sales team that we had were unstructured. They were good salespeople, but their whole feeling was, I can sell sand to the Arabs. Okay, you've heard that type of thing many, many times, but they didn't go into the discussion knowing what the procurement person was going to expect. And they didn't know how much money we made for our product either. So they'd come back and they'd be high. We were making beverage cans for the beverage can industry. And they'd come back and say, look, we've just won 800 million can deal with Heineken. And we wouldn't know whether or not we made any money. So the first thing I did was understand how much money we made for every product, for every customer from every location. And then we started to build our strategy around that and realized that losing certain customers who were also very different customers and replacing them with healthy, strong business made a massive difference to the profitability of the organization without having to go in there and ask for a 15% price increase. It just happened naturally. Creating that churn, losing those customers that we were losing money on, enabled us to do that. And then I became VP of Sales and Marketing. So I led the sales function for Europe and Asia. And I spent the next 3 years selling to all of those organizations, the Carlsbergs, the Heinekens, the Red Bulls, the Coca-Colas, the small family brewers. And every one of them was different. There were some that were incredibly structured. And, the likes of Heineken and Carlsberg and SAB Miller, brilliant. Some of the soft drink companies just wanted you to tell them how wonderful they are. A company like Red Bull wanted you to focus on innovation and creativity and growth and quality, and incredibly driven organization. It was great fun to work with them. You had one brewer who is kind of South American, North American, global, who would probably eat your children if they had to. Very aggressive, very, very strong. And then you had the smaller family-owned companies that just wanted to see them. They wanted to feel recognized. So you had to develop a different style and a different technique with all of them. And I got to see kind of all 64 elements of the purchasing chessboard develop in front of me and see what was successful as the different customers used them. So 6 years on, CEO and I were in a car. He said, look, we're looking to globalize our procurement function now. We're having it done to us by our customers, and we think there's some benefit in it. We'd like you to bring our North American, South American, and European teams together into one. You're the only internal candidate. We're happy for you to stay where you are. And I was enjoying where I was, but I felt that my heart was still in procurement, and I jumped at the chance to come back as group CPO. And actually, when I look back at that conversation I'd had about you're not ready, he was right. I wasn't ready, and I wasn't ready because of things like sustainability, because of things like ethical procurement, because those are principles that a CPO and his team and her team need to be able to sell internally and to the suppliers. And if you can't sell, you get walked over. So I do think that that it's a really important part of our portfolio is to be able to connect and to sell. And it transformed my capabilities really before I went back to procurement from the dark side.
Yeah, I can certainly resonates with me that the skill is honed. It's amazing how many skills actually sales and procurement that often sit opposite at the opposite sides of the table, but it's incredible how many skills are actually complementary and actually the same. As you said, stakeholder analysis, sales, structure, flexing negotiation styles, etc., etc. But you've mentioned something interesting there that I'd like to pick up on, which is talking about sustainability and ethics in the supply chain. And I'd like to explore that a little bit and your experience at Wrexham. And I think that's the combo we had before. And a sentiment I hear a lot from people I talk to, both who've been in the profession, in the procurement profession for a long time, but also just stepping into it. And I'm interested to see whether we've promised a cozy conversation, whether the participants are finding it the same. When I started out in Procter & Gamble about a bit over 25 years ago, 26 years ago, and bought packaging, there was a lot, we were ship dipped through negotiation styles and analysis, and had an awesome time learning about all the facets of procurement. There was nothing really about ESG at that point. We knew about, virgin paper versus recycling materials and pros and cons, but it was never about circularity. It was never about social value, social responsibility, or even understanding the complexities of that and ecology at that point as well. Now people coming into the profession are, as category leads, also thinking, gosh, not only do I have to understand my market and the drive and the commercial drivers and all of that, but I also need to understand where the products are manufactured, made from, and the risks derived from that. And then Wrexham, as you said, mega can manufacturer, big metal buyer. How would you, what was your experience there? Was it an important element? Did you make it important? What advice would you give to category managers now who are stumped by the amount of complexity they're facing now in procurement?
Yeah. So I think packaging has been the poster child of a lot of these things since the 90s. And it's not new to those industries. The whole focus that they have had, though, is around supporting recycling and not recycled content. And I'll explain to you the two different things. But their whole principle is trying to create circularity within the organization. And it was from the early 90s. And similarly in packaging at DS Smith. So at DS Smith, first of all, we look to ensure that all of the craft paper comes from responsible forestry. Okay, so and that is something that the industry tracks and monitors, and you can see where the wood is coming from, and that is different around the world. But I've visited many of those forests, and they're if in the South America the trees last for 13 years before they're chopped down, there is always 13 years worth of trees in growth. In the Nordics, it can take up to 75 years for the trees to grow. So they have vast forests, and they only chop down 1/75th a year, and then they replant for the 76 years time. And there is this continuity of coming through. But you have to have some forestry coming in, even if you recycle 100%, because the fibers only last 7, some people say 14 times, but most people say 7 times. So you can only actually recycle cardboard around 7 times before the fibers become too small and they won't reattach with each other. So you need some virgin paper coming in, but as long as you are constantly planting, it's kind of a healthy situation. In aluminium, we have a different position because it's ultimately recyclable. So when you melt AI, it becomes AI. It just, you melt it and you make a new can out of it. You might have 0.5% of burn off in the process, but it's that kind of loss percentage. So the industry's whole focus has been around working with governments from a legislative perspective, but also from a method perspective. And there are some countries that have got it nailed. Okay, so most Nordic countries recycle beverage cans at 99%. Most Sub-African, South American, Southern Asian countries are at 99%. But the reason is very different there. In the Nordics, you pay 25 cents, the equivalent of, and you get it back when you take the can back. And they're very religious in taking it back. And they're reverse vending machines. You put it in, you get your money. In South America, in Africa, can is worth a penny. The aluminium in the can is worth a penny. So you will not find one in the ground, and you will not find one in a rubbish bin. Somebody has collected it and sold it. And it's about that process that we're trying to promote. But you have to work with governments, because if you don't, disasters can happen. So I'll give you an example of a disaster. In Germany in the early 2000s, they introduced something called what became the can ban in effect. So you had to pay a deposit on the can, but the can industry had said it won't happen, it won't happen, it won't happen, and closed their eyes for years and years and years, and didn't put processes in place. And the supermarkets had no mechanism for receiving them back. So the supermarket said, look, if we sell the can here, we have to have a counter where someone can bring it back. We have to employ someone to give them the money. We don't have the reverse vending machines. So they removed the cans from the shelf. Overnight, the German can market went from 8 billion to 100 million overnight. And it still hasn't recovered. It's still, close to 1 billion. It's nowhere near where it was before this happened. In the UK, we have 365 councils all doing their own thing. There is no standardization around how we collect and recycle. North America, it feels like no one cares. You're down at below 50% of the beverage cans are recycled. So, and the industry focuses on recycling and not recycled content. And the reason for that is cans are easy to recycle and everyone wants that recycled material. So trying to compete with McLaren, with Jaguar Land Rover, with Apple for that recycled content is very hard. You can never do it. They'll pay whatever they need to do for that recycled content, whereas the metal in a can is 60% of the cost. So you're unlikely to challenge that principle. So you have to flip the narrative a little bit and say, look, if we make a product and it's recycled, that's still good. The fact that some of that material will come back into the next can, creating a closed loop is just too expensive because you just can't compete with the others.
Mm. But focusing back on the categories, and we're getting some questions coming in. So,
Yep.
Adrian, thank you for that, and Harold as well. It's again about what advice would you give? And I think that's Adrian's as well. What advice would you give to young people entering the profession, the procurement profession, about leading with ethics and building and practicing strong ethics in that situation? There's so much complexity now. How would you advise them to carry on?
So first of all, you need to educate yourself and you need to understand what it is we're really talking about. So when people talk about modern slavery and we talk about forced labor and we talk about children in the workforce, what does that look like? And it doesn't look like when I used to work in my dad's factory when I was 14. It doesn't look like that. It is very, very, very different. And it is about people whose lives are being controlled by an organization and they can't afford to escape from that place. So first of all, you need to educate yourself. What is it we're trying to protect here? It's not a word. These are people who are living very uncomfortable lives. And the numbers are anything from 28 million to 60 million. I don't know what the exact number is, but there's a lot of, it's probably much greater than that if we knew about everything that was going on. But for sure, it is happening in your supply chain. Now, many organizations that I've been involved with or connected with and suppliers, and the answer is that you get, we've written to all of our suppliers and asked them, do you have slaves in your supply chain? They've all said no. So we're good, aren't we? And it's that tick box exercise isn't good enough anymore. It wasn't good enough 20 years ago when it started, but there are objectives to try and change the law so that asking isn't enough. You need to be able to demonstrate that you have taken action to ensure that you don't have supply chain ethical issues. And sometimes it's not your first tier. It might be your second tier or your third tier. But you have to understand. My advice would be, first of all, understand which of the industries where it's most likely. And there are lists that we can provide that are around security and warehouse work, and small factory assembly. There are a number of industries where you should target. There are also countries where you should target, but those countries where you should target are where it's most happening. It doesn't mean it's not happening at home. And there are hundreds of cases in the UK of modern day slavery happening. So, and we had a supplier in Finland that had subcontracted some work to a logistics partner, and we weren't using them anymore, but we had used them as a subcontractor, and they were raided by the police, and they had 9 Filipino drivers living in a container being paid $2 an hour, and that's in I think it was in Norway, or Denmark, but it was a Scandinavian country, and that's on my doorstep, and it's from a place where you wouldn't expect to see it. So let's not naively think that all of the problems are in Asia or in Africa, or in South America. They are absolutely in Europe, and they are absolutely in North America, and we need to look for them, and we need to ask questions, and we need to ask that it is demonstrated. It's not just about a discussion. It's what have you done? Where have you looked? How have you looked? When did you visit? Have you used go and see? Because, and it shouldn't be an announced go and see where, yeah, don't come in tomorrow because we've got someone coming to inspect. You need to just turn up. And we need to take it seriously. I listened, and I'm going to post it after this actually, and I'll copy you in on it, Victoria. But it was a really, there's an Australian lady, I've forgot her name, but she was talking about the green journey that we're currently on, and how we're all driving and striving towards these new green energy initiatives. Yet the companies involved in that journey and in that process are far less ethical when it comes to their practices, and many of them are using, for example, some of the chemicals used in photovoltaics. All come from 45% of them come from a region in China that we know has issues. Yet only 2% of those companies have a structured program to try and source from another region. So they're in effect saying, "Oh, it's okay. We need the product. It's cheap, and it's enabling us to be competitive in this process." That's the challenge. We're celebrating all of this journey towards green energy, but it's being done on the back of slaves, and it's a really good video, but that's really what she's saying. And it's we need to always make sure that we're not conflicted in our decisions, that you rush to use energy from PV, and then you realize that, shouldn't have done that.
It's an interesting thing you are giving as an example, Alex, because when I started co-chairing the human rights chapter of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, I've been pointed to some really cool resources, and one of them is the Sustainability Supply Chain School that's been put together, I think 7-10 years ago by, don't quote me on the years, but a while ago, by 7 construction companies in DEFRA, and said, we know that there is modern slavery in the construction supply chain. We're not going to lie about it, but we're here, and there's a free resource that we're all behind to educate. And it is an immensely helpful organization. It's a charity, and a lot of the content, really deep content there, is for free. And one of the first session I went to, because I was interested about it, was the modern slavery problems in the solar supply chain. And it's exactly that. The Uyghur region manufactures 98% of the product, and yet we have the biggest modern slavery exposure in China, where they are where they are discriminating heavily against the Uyghurs in that region, and the slavery conditions in manufacturing solar, which opened my eyes, and exactly what you said, like you're killing yourself trying to do the best thing for the environment, and yet you are perpetuating and the modern slavery challenges that it brings. And that's, I guess, back to the young professionals starting out and saying, geez, there's just so much that it's an eggshell, it's a minefield. Like, how do you even like go through it? And I think what you said, educating yourself and visiting, is key. For me, if I was in a profession starting out, and one of my old CPOs told me, what are you doing in the office? As a supply chain professional, as a procurement professional, 5 days in the office, you cannot be like, what are you doing? You have to be 2 days at your clients, understanding what they want, working with them, honing your skills, being as close to them to create that relationship of trust. And then the other 2 days, you have to be at your suppliers, learning about the process, educating yourself in what it means, the whole value of supply chain, depending on whether you're buying products and services. And then 1 day in the office where you bring it all together when you do your sit down work. But I think for a procurement professional starting out, I'd say get obsessed with your category, get obsessed with what you're buying. And actually, it's not an overhead, it's not a burden, because when I think about what I did 25 years ago, there was so much paper pushing, and the systems were so poor, and you couldn't find a supplier because the internet wasn't developed. Now, so much more stuff is so much more readily available and faster to do, that this other problem that we have now is not a burden, it's an opportunity to shine and to differentiate yourself. So there's so much that's been automated. Now you have to kind of use your brain, your creativity, to create a risk map and create a category strategy that is that takes these things into account and is ever evolving. So the other thing, I guess, which is so important, is the attitude of continuous learning. As you said, like, I thought that I knew it all, and then I went, and this one session webinar just completely changed my attitude to solar panels, because I was one of the big proponents of it. And we've basically, in my days as the CPO of an Asian company, we put them on as many of our warehouses in Asia as we could, because that was just like, this is what we do. And now I'm looking at it thinking, oh, wow, I didn't realize what I was doing. I would still probably do it, but I'd do it a bit differently. And then I engage suppliers differently in the dialogue. And that's, I guess, what the difference is. And we're kept on our toes by the knowledge that is being delivered. So I guess
I think to that point, the way the brain works, emotionally, we're celebrating the fact that we're moving forward with green technology because it's fantastic and it's helping us towards sustainable. And I don't know whether it kind of shuts the other part of the brain off, that so that you just, because obviously if it's sustainable, it must be good. Obviously it's for good, but actually it's being made in a dark way. And I listened to a brilliant podcast by Kelly Barner on the art of procurement, and with regards to the Uyghurs, there's very, very strict rules being put in place with regards to, you can't buy from the Xinjiang area where the Uyghurs are. There are sanctions connected with that region, but when you put strict sanctions on that, all it means is you've told people how to get around the sanctions. So they're now moving the Uyghurs to other areas. It's like, this is so and then we're fine buying it from another area, even though they're still involved in the process. I think it's dangerous. And the Japanese used to call it Genji Genbutsu, go and see. When I took over the logistics category in the 90s, I spent 2 weeks on a lorry with a driver. I'd arrive every morning, do the pre-vehicle checks, look at our log for the day, and I would accompany him on his whole route for the day, collecting parts eventually to the Burnaston manufacturing plant, because the Japanese said, you if you don't understand what's going on, Alex, you can't improve it. So I went out physically in the lorry for 2 weeks to understand how logistics works. And to your point about immerse yourself in the category, it's the only way to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. There are a lot of very good points that you've raised, and my mind is racing because there's a couple of things. Also, my passion project as bringing out, human rights complexities out to procurement, whether they want to listen or not. Sometimes it feels like it. But one of the things that is becoming more and more apparent is the fact that in the corporate world, I see that there are very separate teams that work on carbon emissions. And as you said, very defined projects, KPIs, metrics, systems are still, systems are fragmented, but they're, again, much easier to find. Whereas on human rights, it's a much earlier journey. And it feels like there is a competition between resources and management time, etc. People don't look at these complexities as one, but they look at it very task driven. And I think that there will be next year a lot more talk of the convergence of circularity and communities and green and human rights. There has to be, because we can't tick one off and leave the other one burning. That defeats the whole purpose. There are some comments and questions. Harold is saying, if the executive leaders in the company don't want to write down the company's ethical compass in a policy to govern, money will most likely win. Yeah, I mean, how do you think about that statement?
Yeah, so one of the things that that I did at my last organization was I tried to scare the life out of the senior leaders and tried to make them understand that as we live today, I can't guarantee that we don't have something in our supply chain that you're not happy with. I think I've lost you for a second, Victoria. I'll carry on speaking.
Okay.
I said
I'm back.
I couldn't guarantee that there was nothing in our supply chain, and also because of how much rogue spend that we had. That's not on my watch. I was at a CPO event last week. There was a brilliant demonstration of how this company was using AI. But they said that if there is a spend below 130,000, that procurement don't get involved. And I was blown away by that number, the size of that number. And what you need to be able to demonstrate to everybody is, first of all, as CEO, you could go to prison. It's that serious. The company could have 10% of its turnover fined, not profit. These are serious numbers. And you could lose all of your global key accounts because they will not tolerate this type of behavior. So if I can't be able to demonstrate, and I think the situation, if you look at when Boohoo were caught a few years back, their share price dropped 2 billion the next day, and they never really recovered. They're in the process of pretty much dismantling the whole company now. They've never recovered from that when they found slaves in Leicester, not in Asia, in Leicestershire. But interestingly, that was found by a journalist. It wasn't found by a government agency. And these are quite cool things for journalists to find. So they're going to be out there looking at us. So I tried to scare the C-suite into backing us. And we ended up with a policy that was every pound, euro, and dollar through procurement. So that, I said, look, if you want us to own this and be responsible, then we need to make sure that we touch and feel every piece of the procurement. And if you give it us, we'll own it. My biggest hope, Victoria, is AI. And I'll tell you why. we don't have time to do all of this, okay? Because we are doing so many things. If you've got 5,000 suppliers, where do you start? You can't visit them all. For me, AI isn't going to suddenly remove hundreds of thousands of procurement jobs. What we need to be talking about is how do we use it to enable us to have the time to behave and act more strategically and do the things that we should be doing when it comes to social, ethical, and the environment when we're doing the sourcing. If we can remove those repetitive tasks by using AI, then we should use that to free up people's time to do this, not throw them on the scrap heap. And we need to remove that narrative as soon as possible, because every procurement function is on demand. Every procurement function. None of them.
Yeah,
I've never heard a CPO saying, I've got too many people.
I agree. I agree. And especially blockchain can do actually absolute miracles. And I'm surprised that blockchain is not so widely used, but maybe one of the reasons it isn't is because it's so powerful, because we've created blockchain passports that were able to scan a packet of ibuprofen and tell you if it's intended, if it's fake or not, and if it's intended for the country's use or if it's parallel import, which was less important to the end consumer, but more important to probably the manufacturer. But these were the kind of details that you could do just from an app scanning a certain product. And it's incredible what you can do with a digital passport when it goes. I am with you. Technology is doing amazing things for us if we embrace it, and we have to coach it and learn it. So that's why it's so interesting to see. And you know, we have a podcast coming up about human rights technology, what's out there to help accelerate all these assessments. But I think to answer Harold's, or not to answer, but to reflect on Harold's point, for me, when I started the procurement journey or the sustainable procurement journey in my past organization in Asia, where there are no regulations, I did it because I believed that this was the right thing to do. And I also wanted to move procurement away from low cost only kind of focus, because the people were starting to get dazed and bored. And I thought, these young people, they're coming in with their ambitions, fresh from university, and all of a sudden you kind of tell them, and all you have to do is do the lowest price and cut a PO. So creating a sustainable procurement policy and program all of a sudden gave them the right to use their creativity to look at the category broader, et cetera, et cetera. And I did that before there was even a corporate responsibility policy. So the corporate responsibility policy actually took, for various reasons, it takes longer to figure out what your material risks are, I suppose. But then I dovetailed it kind of dovetailed into mine. I've looked at my sustainability policy and said, actually, a lot of things that I wrote back 2017, 2018 were still valid despite the whole now structure of sustainability within the organization. And I actually think, going back to what the thread of this conversation is, Alex, what you said at the very beginning, education is key. Like, once you have the facts and you figure out how to tell the story with a little bit of carrot and a lot of stick, then actually the C-suite cannot ignore it. They have to educate themselves as well then. And they hate knowing less about something than you do. So actually, it's knowledge and insight is a very powerful tool to use to progress these kind of things.
One of the things, Victoria, I'd like to see, and I don't know if you can help drive it, but two things don't happen effectively for me. One is when you find an unethical problem within your supply chain, how to deal with it, and we should almost have something that is supported by the government, that is kind of a period or moratorium where you fix it, where it's okay, you found it, and then we have a period to fix it, rather than we find it, we don't want anyone to know, let's just turn the tap off, because that's the worst thing that can happen. We need to educate and fix these situations when we find them. And when you found it and fixed it, we should feel comfortable celebrating it and talking about it, because you don't hear about what would be, in effect, a success story when someone finds something in one of their supply chains that's inappropriate. We worked with the local community. We worked with the, we moved the children back to school. We changed the salary process within there. We helped them develop a more profitable organization and business. And we still work with them today, and look at it now. Those stories we don't hear about. They are happening, but we don't celebrate them. And that's something that, if the success is hidden as well as the problem, then we're never going to get anywhere.
Trying to get people in procurement and in big organizations to talk about their challenges and how they have become them is notoriously difficult, Alex. I agree with you. I'm facing that hugely with the chapter I'm running, because people are opening up, and I have incredible stories to share of these challenges and intended consequences of a lot of bad decisions, of bad KPIs in that area. But they are not ready to talk about them and being recorded, because a lot of times that exposes them then to these investigative journalists, or there's that fear that I cannot tell that I had a problem, because that would drive the reputation of their organization down. I think the unintended consequences of a lot of these laws is that more and more people will be hiding from openly sharing, unless, you know, there are some industries who have put their foot down and said, like the construction industry, we know what's happening, let's not lie about it, but this is what we're doing to fix it. And I see a couple of other industries going that way, because there are some leaders who believe that, as you said before, collaboration is the way to fix it. But of course, this is one thing that we're still working on, sharing and exposing these things. And you're right, I know of people who, like the African cotton industry, suffered immensely because there is issues there, but a lot of the big American retailers decided they're not going to buy cotton from Africa because they cannot demonstrate 100% no slavery. So as a result, we buy it from somewhere else, a region that is perceived low risk. Oh, we buy it from America. The fact that there's slavery there as well, they kind of forgot, but because it's America, they kind of think, no, it's not as bad as Africa, which is funny and sad at the same time. But what they did, they plunged all these guys in Africa into poverty, because you can't just take livelihood away like that. Why don't you uplift them? But there are a lot of stories in the cocoa area and others of true uplift, which hopefully we can share. I know we're running close to the end, 1 minute left. I want to thank everybody who commented and asked questions. Adrienne, Harold. I know I haven't answered, Ashif, your question, but I will offline, because it's not easy to answer it very quickly about how to identify modern slavery in the procurement field. But I'd love to share with you the work that I have done and others in that field. I think, wow, like it was a bit slow starting, but there's a lot that came out of it, Alex. And I want to thank you for the immense insight and your willingness to be the first to speak. Thank you very much. We have a next one coming up on the 16th of December, and I hope you guys tune in. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Victoria. Keep fighting the fight.